What's it gonna be today? What do we have? Subaru key. Huh. It's a BRZ. This thing's still got the packing tape on it. I don't think it's that low on. I don't think the mileage is that low. What are we at here? It's got exhaust, it sounds like. 6,477. Big old fat weighted shift knob. God, that's gross. So what you're gonna see a lot of from me in the next few videos is cars that are fairly stock but have a lot of potential from a tune that I'm developing some off-the-shelf style tunes for, so that if you have, say, a factory BRZ, you can just load, you can call up or go on the website, purchase the tune and load it on your car and have additional horsepower, additional torque, and better throttle response and throttle features, as well as some things like launch control if it's available, stuff like that. And that way you can go race your car in the form that fits your class rules. And that's pretty important as we come into race season. Previously, we've only really allowed people to get on the dyno and have custom tunes done, but realistically, just with the way the schedule is, trying to get everybody in and on the dyno and tuned just doesn't work. And we can still do that, obviously. If you want to come in and get a tune, we'll get you taken care of. But for 90% or so of the customers, most of their cars fall within a couple of variations of a base tune, and we can get you to 95% of the potential horsepower of the car without ever seeing the dyno, just loading the tune that we've built for the parts that are on the car. So that's what we're going to be doing, and that's what I'm going to be doing on this BRZ today, is starting with just a basic, totally stock car tune. What can we do on a completely stock, like I said, I think this has a catback exhaust, but what can we do on a stock car? And then we're going to be doing a couple of different intake options. We're going to be modifying a stock intake, and then we're going to be installing a parent intake and seeing what we can do with getting power and tunes built for those. So enjoy the content, and we'll keep it coming. Pop the hood. Oh. Hey, it's got hood struts. That's fun. Like I said, totally stock intake, unmodified stock intake, I need to say. Ooh. I'm amazed the car is sitting here. The dyno wasn't locked. This is how well balanced this car is. The dyno rollers are unlocked right now, and it's sitting on the roller, and that's fun. You can see on this version of the car, they actually made the intake a little bit better than the other version of the car. The earlier one came straight out and made a tight 90, and this makes a nice swoop. So small improvements from Subaru. I think the header design is pretty similar. I don't think much has changed there. The engine is obviously bigger, but the cylinder heads are pretty much the same as well. So everything else pretty much the same. I'm not 100% sure how much of the exhaust is modified on this. Let's find out here with the flashlight. So that's, yeah, it's stock cat there, stock header there. So all those parts are stock. And like I said, I believe it has some kind of an axle back. Yeah, that's not stock. Not sure whose this is. It looks pretty good. I don't know who makes that one. I'll find out. So we've got our tack pickup to the dyno there, and we've got our wideband air fuel sniffer back here, and that's really all that we need to get this thing tuned. Everything else is going to be read by the onboard computer, and all of the other information that we need will come from that. In fact, the air fuel ratio and everything will also come from that, but since we like to be able to compare the air fuel ratio of the dyno to the air fuel ratio of the car, just to make sure we're not seeing anything weird. So beyond that, to get the car ready for the dyno, we're just going to check the air pressure in the tires, make sure that we're looking good. only really need the rear tires because, you know, rear-wheel drive car. Looking at 25.9, so we're gonna get a little air in these, and that's probably fine for whatever autocross stuff he was doing. He probably was running them at a little bit lower pressure. These are just Continentals. These aren't anything extreme, so they might just be low. Don't know. We're gonna air them up for the dyno and do a baseline. One thing I did want to mention, I always strap cars down regardless of whether they're low power or high power with a sufficient amount of straps to make sure that nothing bad can happen. You will lose a little power by adding more straps and putting more pressure on the tires. There's some videos floating around the internet of people with BRZs doing some crazy stuff on the dyno with super loose straps, so the cars look wild and they're jumping up on the rollers, and yeah, it probably made them, you know, read a little bit higher, but holy crap, at what cost? That car comes off the dyno, you're gonna have a real big problem. Last thing we do on every car is we always check the oil. Looks pretty good. Give it a wipe. Dump it back in. Do it one-handed because you don't have a cameraman. It's hard to read these, but it's looking a little, maybe a hair low, but not on that side. Yeah, it's probably okay. That's it. Now we're going to go ahead and shut the hood for baseline pulls, because that's how you drive the car. So that's what we're gonna do. Reason my wideband cuts out every pull at 5,500 RPMs. So we're gonna have to use the onboard to do most of our testing, but I did third gear, which is the first two pulls, and second gear, or sorry, fourth gear, which is the second two. It definitely likes fourth gear better. What's interesting is I'm only seeing a 1.8 horsepower difference between two pulls and third, and I actually lost not quite half a horsepower between two pulls and fourth. Why I say that's interesting is today, of all days, when I had planned to do this test, is the day that Cobb released their BRZ tuning package. And in their BRZ tuning package, they talk about how wildly different this car is from pull to pull. But I just did 4 pulls on the dyno, and so the first pull, in fact, let's clear them all off here. The very first pull was this 204 in third gear, and it dipped off pretty hard up top before it hit limiter. And I did another pull back to back, picked up a little power in the mid-range. This is just back-to-back pulls. I actually lost a little power, then picked up a little power, and it carried a little more power out top. That's 4 horsepower there at 7,100. 7 horsepower or so at 7,300. This is on the tach pickup, so this is as close as you're going to get to a true tachometer match. So let's clear those two off. Now there was no time, I mean the time difference between these 4 runs is minutes. I mean like a minute between the runs. Fourth gear pulls, super consistent. I mean like here we're half a horse, there we're, you know, less than that, 0.84 to 69.18, so 0.3 horse. It's so close from pull to pull. I'm not really sure what Cobb was seeing when they were seeing these wildly different results, unless they were doing them on different days. And that's why it's always important to have the same day. Well, it's the same day, and we're gonna tune this car today, so we're gonna have the same day results to compare my fourth gear numbers, 213 and 212. We'll just do the best of the best. We'll do this 213. This will be our comparison file, our comparison run, our best baseline. So all of our tunes need to try to compare to this. Now let me bust out my phone here and see I was literally just reading this. So on Cobb's, it's actually from Mike McGinnis at Innovative Tuning. Here is on a Mustang dyno, they were seeing actually way bigger numbers than me. So that's interesting. But yeah, 235, 240, yeah, I don't know, man. This is a dyno jet. Everyone says dyno jets read high, but here's a Mustang dyno putting down higher numbers on a stock car. So, you know, dyno is a dyno is. Who knows what correction factors they're running, or if it's in some other mode or whatever. Oh, we can click the image to expand. There we go. So yeah, there's like stock pull 3. I'm guessing that's third gear. Knocking heavily, power didn't, I don't know what it means. Basically they had some custom tune on the car and they said it knocked really bad. They've got a way bigger torque dip than we do. That's almost a 15 horsepower dip in the torque there, 15 foot-pounds. I guess we got about that. If I shrink the run, make it skinny. It's all about presentation of data, right? There we go. Yeah, that looks a little more like their graph. Yeah, there you go. Data presentation. A lot of tuners do weird stuff with data presentation to try to make things look better than they are or worse than they are. Other than my wideband dropping out, which I apologize, I got to figure out what's going on with that. But these cars luckily have good onboard widebands, so it won't be an issue. Anyway, this is where we're starting. I guess our numbers are low compared to Innovative Tuning's numbers, but whatever, that doesn't matter because we're all about gains. So according to this, our target gain is 2.2 horsepower. So that's what we're trying to make. If we can make 2.2 horsepower on a hot engine to a hot engine, same car, same roller, then we're doing good. So that's our goal. So I've actually already tuned a number of these and I have a base map ready to go. And comparing it to the stock map, you can see there's the maps in purple are all maps that have been changed. So there's a lot of maps that are different in the tune that we're doing. So there's a lot to change on these ECUs, and it's not as straightforward as some of the previous BRZ generations. The software isn't really like dialed in. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start with a stock image and flash that to the car and see if just having the Ecutech software on the car changes anything power-wise. And then we're going to start tuning in the very similar process to what we did on that Crosstrek, where we start by tuning cams and then we go in and we tune fueling and timing and other things. But we're basically going to start with the cams after we make some just base overall changes to the fueling maps and things like that so they're smoother. So ECU Tech uses a little bit different tuning method. They actually have flash points. So this BRZ costs 255 flash points, and that's fine. So we're going to go ahead and allocate those flash points and flash the car. And try not to sneeze while we're flashing it because these things are sensitive. And I mean super duper sensitive. So there it goes. It's gonna take a minute, and then once it's done, I will do another poll as a baseline for the tuning polls after we did the baseline for the previous polls. Lots of baselines, that's the name of the game. You're just trying to compare. And the only way you're gonna be able to know if you made a difference is if you compare. And if you're not comparing apples to apples, then you're not going to get good data. And I think that's what Mike was going into, Mike McGinnis, on that Cobb post, is just that you really have to make sure that what you're comparing are apples to apples. Otherwise, if you're boasting a 25 horsepower gain, but it's not a true apples to apples comparison, then is it really 25 horsepower? By the way, when you're flashing, you're going to get all kinds of lights on the dash. Don't worry about that. That's just the car being mad that the ECU is being ripped apart and put back together. Okay, so we have our logger. I don't need flex fuel stuff, which is default. Yeah, we'll run the default list on the logger. So, like I said, this is just a stock map with Ecutech features loaded, so it allows for the full logger and everything. And then everything else is stock, so we're just going to do a stock baseline on Ecutech. I got her in track mode, so we're good to go there. We're going to go to 4th gear because that's what we determined we like as far as consistency and the length of the pole and everything goes. So we're going to do a 4th gear pull on Ecutech, but stock. I know that's a lot to grab a hold of there. So here we go. And these are really anticlimactic pulls. So what's interesting about that pull, and I could probably tell you why if we dig in, but that pole was quite a bit lower power than the other ones. And so we're going to do another pole here to get it dialed in. But basically there's some learning that happens. So this is our best baseline, and this is what it just did. So it actually did almost 11 less horsepower, and the air fuel, who knows what the air fuel is doing. My thing's still dropping out, so we're just gonna get rid of air fuel for the sake of today's exercise. I'll be logging it and looking at it, but yeah, I mean, it really lost a lot of power everywhere, which is quite interesting. So once car comes down to a stop, we're going to go ahead and do another pull, and then I'm going to show you why it lost all this power in the tune file. And it may not pick up the power on this pull either, but I'm wondering if this is what Mike was seeing and they're not talking about for some reason. And that's if the car hasn't learned its ignition timing advance, it's going to put down low numbers. Like if I was to use this as a baseline, I'm going to pick up crazy numbers. So these are still low. This is really, really quite interesting. That. But what I want you to look at is this number here. It's called the advanced multiplier, and it's almost back to 1, but it's not quite there yet. I'm super curious why this thing lost 10 horsepower by loading Ecutech software. Weird. Kind of trippy. I don't know what's going on. But we're going to get the power back, I hope. Alright, after I dug into it a little bit, I know what was happening. So if you look down here, it wasn't the dynamic advance. It was my VVT hadn't come on yet. So we didn't have VVT advance going on. So now we're going to go ahead and do a pull and see where we end up, and my guess is it's going to be pretty spicy. I was digging through here trying to figure out what was going on, and so I loaded another one of my base maps. So this is actually basically a tuned map that I did for another customer, and we're going to see what this one does, and I'm hoping that it makes power. And doesn't have a whole bunch of knock because it's a tune for a different customer. Luckily, this is an employee's car. This is not a shop-owned car. This is an employee-owned car. And as such, I'm just going to beat on it mercilessly. It's stock enough we could, you know, take it back to Subaru if we would like that. But here we go. Data logger doing stuff. Looking good. Knocky. so here was our best baseline, our 213 and 170 foot-pounds, and now we are tuned up, good to go, 220 and 175. So seeing a little bit more than what Cobb did, and these two runs are as similar as we can get as far as oil temperature and gearbox temperature and day-to-day and everything. So we're seeing about a 7 horsepower gain, which is a little bit better than what Cobb was advertising with their map, but you know, this should be pretty consistent. I'm not seeing big dips and drops from pole to pole. It took a little bit of effort. I actually found out that this car is pretty sensitive to the correct ROM ID, and I'm not really sure what that was about. Normally with Ecutech, you can kind of pick and match, or you know, pick from any of the compatible ROM IDs, but for whatever reason, the ROM ID that I had for this car, which was different than what, oh man, look up here. That's an 8 horsepower gain right there. That's pretty substantial. So definitely a lot more top end before the drop off. And this car is totally stock. It's just got a catback. The other interesting thing is Cobb's numbers are significantly higher for the baseline on this car, but like I've got other, this was a 100% stock one in the green here from a different customer. This was as stock as they come, right off the dealer floor. This thing had like 1,000 miles on it. So I'm seeing baselines all around 211, between 211 and 213 there for most of the cars that come to the dyno. So I'm not really sure why Cobb's was seeing 230 on their Mustang dyno of all things. So that was kind of interesting. But one of the weird things about Mustang dynos is you can run whatever correction factors you want, whereas the dyno jets on the newer software just run a standard correction. This is smoothing 5. I guess if I went down to like smoothing 0, we might see, yeah, a little bit rougher, but a little bit better numbers, you know, whatever. I like smoothing 5 even though the numbers are lower, just because it makes it look a little better. A lot of tuners run smoothing 3, still looks pretty good. Actually, it looks better than the stock as far as the smoothing goes. Anyway, yeah, there we go. So I want to go over real quick. So I want to kind of go over the different things that you have to change on these cars, and why, while this seems like a tuner platform that everyone wants to tune, why in reality the BRZ FRS GT86, whatever they call them, the twins, we like to call them frisbees around here, but why these are actually a terrible tuning platform. So let's go through that real quick. Let me go ahead and kind of go through what's going on this particular engine and why it's so difficult to actually tune, and why it's very time consuming and everything. So basically you have a horizontally opposed 4-cylinder, which everyone knows that's what Subaru puts in all their cars. Some of them have 6 cylinders, not the BRZs, but some Subarus. But anyway, all the newer Subarus are all 4-cylinder horizontally opposed engines. Some have turbochargers, some are naturally aspirated like this one. What makes these really tricky to tune is they actually have 2 distinctly separate fuel systems that blend depending on what's happening. So there is a port injection system, so a traditional fuel rail, that feeds an injector in each cylinder, which is how you've seen just about every fuel injected car ever. But also, if you get down, you probably can't see them, but underneath the rails there, and then under this little foam pad here, there is actually direct injectors. And those direct injectors are shooting fuel directly into the cylinders, not through the intake valves. And so the direct injection allows for better atomization and better fuel economy, but it doesn't clean the intake valves, which is a downside to direct injection engines. You see a lot of BMWs, the newer Subarus, everything are very prone to carbon buildup. So what we have is those port injectors, and those are going to help clean the intake valves, and then the direct injectors get better mileage and better atomization. But the car uses both, and it flip-flops between them, and it blends them under different situations. And so that creates a really difficult thing to tune. So you have direct injection timing, which has a very narrow window based on cam timing and some other things. And then you have port injection timing, which you also have to take into account. So then you have your traditional ignition timing, and that's pretty normal. But there is also variable cam timing. So you have dual overhead cam, 2 cams on that bank and 2 cams on this bank. And there's an intake cam and then the exhaust cam, and all of those are adjustable. So you have to make sure that your intake cam and exhaust cam overlap is also set up for optimal power. We have a traditional mass airflow meter. Well, it's not traditional, this is a digital one. So all the newer Subarus use digital MAFs, which are actually really easy to tune. I really like digital MAFs. Ford's been using them for years. They're pretty amazing. But then you also have a drive-by-wire system. So you have an electronic throttle body that uses a torque-based, torque-based calibration to determine whether it's going to be wide open throttle or part throttle. It's not just in the tune file, you're at 20% throttle, it opens 20%. There is a bunch of overlays and tables and other things that are going to determine when and if that opens. So you have to blend all of these systems together in order to get a good tune on these cars, and then you have to take into account things like oil temperature, transmission gearbox temperature, oil pressure, all of that in order to actually tune the car. So you can see where it gets a little bit difficult and why these are not necessarily the easiest car on the planet to tune. So if you want something easy, you want to go back to an early Subaru or just not a Subaru. But these are about as complicated a setup as you're going to find in a modern 4-cylinder engine. Some Hondas have actual VTEC as well, which is a different thing that makes them a little bit more complicated, dual variable cams with a third cam lobe. So that's about the only time you're going to get more complicated, but those cars don't have dual fuel systems. They have just direct injection or just port injection. So because we have 2 fuel systems, 2 cams, mass airflow, it also runs a speed density underlay, so it has speed density maps as well. It is a nightmare of blending things that all have to work together to get the output what you want.